Welcome back to another Giants Huddle podcast, all brought to you by PSEG, energy efficiency for game time and anytime. Visit PSEG.com/Giants for discounts, rebates, and home energy assessments. On this Giants Huddle podcast with Paul Dottino and John Schmeelk is the one and only Greg Cosell, who's been, I don't know, the grandpappy, perhaps, of NFL film for a long time. You're kind of the elder statesman there, I think it's fair to say, right?
Unfortunately, I'm not the president or anything, but I am the longest tenured employee.
Are you really?
I am. I just finished, John, my 43rd season in NFL film.
Congratulations. That's awesome. So no one has watched more tape than this guy. You can also find them on the NFL Matchup Show, which you can find on ESPN as well. They do a great job.
Must-see TV.
Him and Darius Butler and your crew over there just do a great job. So
I appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. We love watching the show. You do a fantastic job, Greg. Love to have you on. So why don't we start with some Giants stuff first before we go to the draft here. Big decisions coming up on Daniel Jones and Saquon Barkley. Your thoughts on those two guys in terms of how they did this year, rolling the Giants offense moving forward? You could take this whatever direction you want, Greg. Go right ahead.
Well, let's leave the money aside because, again, I don't deal with that.
I'm talking on the field stuff. Yeah.
I thought that Daniel Jones had a really solid year. I thought that Brian Dable kind of came in and in some ways spoon-fed him. I mean, this was not an offense where they asked necessarily Daniel Jones to throw the ball a lot, to drop back 40, 45 times a game. I think there was a clear sense that they wanted to take advantage of his running ability.
A lot of play-action boot early in the
both
year,
by design
like
and also my sense just watching the tape was they probably told Jones that if he saw an opening, take off and run. And be effective doing that because you're capable of doing that, and that's going to be a meaningful part of our offense.
And we also might not trust the offensive line to protect you for much longer than that, so go and
Correct.
run again.
Correct. And then I thought as the season progressed, and it started with that first Vikings game, I thought that, and again, the Vikings did not have a great pass defense, so that may have factored in as well.
Understatement of the century.
But I thought that they felt that, hey, now Jones we can be a little more aggressive throwing the ball. I think they had a sense that those three wide receivers, while not big-time studs, were at least giving them some stability and continuity at the wide receiver position. Hodgins, Richie James, Slayton, they became the three guys. I forget what week but it was, as the second half of the season.
Yeah, Christmas Eve.
They kind of became the guys,
16,
and
right.
I think they felt that they could then have a passing game that was certainly a little more stable than it was earlier in the season. Right. So I don't know if this would be considered bold or controversial, but if I had to prioritize, if they couldn't feel that both Barkley and Jones could be Giants, Jones would be the guy I would sign. Because I think Saquon Barkley is a good back. I don't think he's a great back. I think he's a big play back who occasionally gives you that. But as far as a sustainer in the run game, where you need to grind out yards, there were some games where they needed to do that, and he's really not that kind of back. So to me, if I had to prioritize, if it came down to that, and like I said, I don't deal with the money, I don't know how that'll play out, but I would prioritize Jones over Barkley.
Now, Joe Shane mentioned to us the other day that he's got 14 offensive linemen under contract right now. When he first came into the job, he only had 5.
Right.
And he said, you know what? They've got a lot better. Obviously, Neil Thomas at the tackles. They got Glowinski in there, very functional.
Solid.
Very functional right guard. He said, we would like to have more competition, though, at left guard and center, and that will come from inside, but we would not preclude ourselves from getting somebody else for those competitive spots.
Sure.
What is your thought about how the Giants' offensive line has come along and how much further it needs to go?
I think that it improved. I think Neil he needs to continue to improve in right tackle. He had one issue coming out that showed up too often this year, and they're well aware of it. Everybody's aware of it, so they're aware of it. He struggles at the top of his pass set on 45-degree and vertical sets. His balance and body control is a bit of a problem.
He winds up on the ground too much.
Yes. He loses his balance. And that's something he needs to work on. Look, everybody knew that even coming out. The Giants are aware of that. But obviously he's their right tackle. That's not going to change. I think, look, ultimately you always want more competition. You want a great O-line. I think Jones is actually a pretty good thrower of the football. I mean, I think that's overlooked at times. he's a pretty good thrower of the football. If you can get him secure, he's kind of tall in the pocket. He's kind of an upright thrower, but he throws it well. I don't know what their plan is at wide receiver. Obviously, they'll get the Robinson kid back, the Kentucky kid. He's a certain kind of player, but they still need, I don't know if they feel, what they feel about Hodgins, but they need some explosiveness at the wide receiver position.
Right, and if they do get that, however they get it, whether it's free agency or the draft, what's the room for growth for Daniel to continue to improve, where it's not an offense where, to quote you, they have to do the spoon feeding, right? Where it's a lot of play action, some stuff is set
They're
up,
going to be past
a lot
that.
of short stuff,
Yeah.
right? So what does it look like when they're past that because there's better talent around him?
Well, look, Jones is not exactly Josh Allen, but we saw with Dable, and I watched Buffalo a lot, every week pretty much when he was there. And, he had some really good intermediate and vertical pass game concepts that you didn't see a lot of with the Giants. So he has that in his arsenal, and you probably see more of that. But they need more explosive plays, and that comes from receiver. Look, I think you have to give a guy like Hodgins a ton of credit. I mean, here's a guy I believe was undrafted, right? Or a late round
I
pick.
think it was day 3 pick. Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
But he was hurt the first 2 years in the league. He barely
And I
played.
remember watching him at Oregon State, big kid, competitive, catches the ball. You saw the traits. You saw what he is with the Giants, and he played extremely well.
Big possession receiver.
And a guy who could, you want him on your team. I mean, solid player. But they don't really have an explosive player at wide receiver. I mean, Slayton can run, but he's, we know what he is. He's not a number 1. He's not a number 2. He's kind of a straight line vertical guy. And there's always a place for those guys stay in the league. But they need, look, there's no Jamar Chases in this draft. There's Jamar Chase. Those guys are special. But this is a draft with a lot of wide receiver depth. The great thing about the wide receiver class in any draft is there's all kinds of flavors. There's guys who are, 5'9", 180 pounds, like Zay Flowers, who I love on tape. There's guys like Jonathan Mingo from Ole Miss, who's 6'3", 226, another guy I really like on tape. There's all kinds of different players. You just have to decide what you want. That's why, for me, it's so hard to make a list of receivers.
Right.
Because you can't compare a 5'9", 180-pound guy with a 6'3", 225-pound guy. They're not going to be deployed the same way in an offense.
Okay, so then I guess let me follow up with that, Paul. So
Okay.
How do you complement then the Hodgins and Robinson? If you're putting the offense together, Greg, what's the type of wide receiver you're looking at that they need, and who are some of the guys that fit that profile in this draft class that you like?
Well, let's say, for the sake of conversation here, on Wednesday at the Combine, it is Wednesday, right?
Yes, it is Wednesday when we're
I
recording.
start to
this.
lose track. Yes.
At least we got that right.
Yeah. Let's say, just for now, that Hodgins and Robinson are going to be 2 of their receivers based on what happened last year. Let's say that's the case.
Yeah.
So Robinson is mostly going to be a slot movement guy. Okay, he's going to line up in multiple locations. He's a movement guy, a motion guy. Maybe he even lines up in the backfield at times. He's that guy. Hodgins is the big, physical, competitive, for want of a better term, as you said, John, a possession guy. So now you need someone who can run. You need someone who can take the top off the defense. Does he have to be a 140 target guy? Does he have to catch 90 balls? No. But he needs to be just a little more than a runner. In other words, it can't be another Darius Slayton. It needs to be a guy who's more complete. That's what you need. It's probably what they thought they were getting, and this was before Dable, what they thought they were getting in Kenny Golladay. And obviously you know what happened there. We don't need to rehash that. But they need a guy. We need a guy that is a more complete receiver that can kind of work at all 3 levels effectively. They don't have that guy.
You know what's interesting, Greg? We know the Giants need some help at receiver. We know they could use some more help stopping the run on the interior of their defense. Get somebody there who could rotate with Williams and
Lawrence.
Dexter Lawrence.
Who's pretty damn good, by the way.
Oh, he's really
He's
good.
unbelievable.
And we know they could use some help at inside linebacker. But yet, when you looked at this team this past year, they were so good in the red zone, defensively and offensively, and that's how they wound up making the playoffs. So it's kind of weird in that their biggest problems were between the 20s, not inside the 20s. How would you explain that as someone who watches so much film?
Yeah, that's a hard thing to explain. And I'm being honest with you, Paul.
That's why I'm asking you.
I'd have to do a really
Good question.
deep dive, though, into just the Giant. I mean, that's something where you'd have to look at all the plays and see what they're running. See why certain plays don't work. I mean, I'm just being honest. I can't answer that with any degree of certainty. The one thing that you'd like to see more of are explosives. They don't have a lot of explosives.
Right.
And every offense, you really need that. You really need to have explosives somewhere in your offense.
You know what's weird to me, though, Greg? They were so good defensively in the red zone. And then when you hear, well, they got to do better against the run and the interior defense, needs to be fortified, usually those two statements don't make sense. In the red zone, you usually have to be stout in there. But the Giants say they need that.
Well, coaches always talk, they see things in a lot more detail than we do. I thought for the most part, obviously Dexter Lawrence had a phenomenal year. You can make the argument he was the best interior D lineman in the game. Williams, I thought, had a solid year, missed a little time, but he had a solid year. I think, look, they got to get better at linebacker.
Yeah.
I mean, they got, they were playing.
And they know it.
They were playing Smith, who's basically become a journeyman, and he was literally playing every snap.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to be better than that. So that's an area they clearly need to be better at. And I don't know how they prioritize the position. A lot of teams don't. Personally, I think that's a mistake, but that's just my opinion. Others could disagree with that, and that's fine. But they got to be better at linebacker for sure.
All right, here's a follow-up, and this might be too much in the weeds for you too, Greg, and if it is, I apologize. We can go to another question. I was actually really, maybe surprised is the wrong word. I'll use the word impressed. Wink Martindale still blitzed a lot this year.
Yep.
Top of the league in blitz rate and all this stuff. But unlike when things fell apart for him at the end of his tenure in Baltimore, right? We all remember that Bengal-Burrow game where he threw for 6 touchdowns and was killing a beat. And with his style and, frankly, the lack of cornerbacks after Dory Jackson, the Giants' defense did not give up a lot of explosive plays down the field this year. How the heck did he do that, keeping such a high blitz rate, yet not allowing those explosive plays without top cornerbacks? Because it seems kind of impossible.
Well, it's funny because he made a big adjustment late in the season. The last 4 or 5 weeks, they were a heavy man team. And then the last 4 or 5 weeks, they changed dramatically.
Yes, they did, absolutely.
They started playing a ton more zone.
Especially against the Vikings in those 2 games, for sure.
And again, only he could tell you. I can't tell you why.
Of course.
I just know that's what the tape showed.
Yeah.
But clearly he did that. I thought he mixed and matched in the secondary an awful lot. The Giants were one of those teams that was tough for me to watch on defense because I kept saying, okay, who's playing corner? Who's playing in the slot? Who's playing, because they started.
They have 7 safeties on the field on this.
Yeah,
play.
they had games where they played games with 7 DBs with 22, 25 snaps with 7 DBs, which is unheard of in the league.
Yeah, they used Landon Collins and Tony Jefferson as linebackers.
Yeah, and McLeod became a huge part of what they did, playing both outside in the slot. I mean, guys, who would be considered journeymen. And he was able to mix and match really effectively.
Right.
And again, John, I can't tell you why they didn't go, other than they didn't. But just people might not be aware because they think of Wink Martindale blitz man to man over the last 4, 5, 6 weeks. He still blitzed, but he wasn't playing anywhere near the same amount of man coverage.
100% right.
I got to ask you about the corners though, because Flott, who was hurt for some of the year, really seemed to impress the coaching staff and the front office.
Yeah.
And remember, Aaron Robinson was lost for the season because of a dreadful knee injury. And coming in, they thought he was going to be cornerback number 2.
Yeah.
How do you feel about those 2 young guys as being part of the competitive mix this year? Because it's obviously going to impact whether or not they import another corner.
Well, I really like both guys coming out of college. Flott was a really good player who just had a thin frame, which he does. I mean, he's probably 175 pounds. But at LSU, he played both in the slot and he played outside. He went outside when Stingley got hurt, but and he played outside for the Giants a lot.
Yes.
I think he has outside corner traits. The question is, how do you feel about him at 175 pounds? So that's a philosophy thing with a coach. Only Martindale and I guess the DB coach, and they have to figure that out. Robinson, I remember watching him, I believe Central Florida he came out of. He played both outside and in the slot in college, and he's a tough, physical competitive kid.
Like him a lot.
Excuse me. And I don't know how they see him. Do they see him as a slot guy? Do they see him as an outside guy? I think he can do or either one or both. But I think both those guys will be majorly in the mix for this year, and they'll work out through the off season how they see them, whether they're slot guys or inside or outside guys. But I think both guys have starter traits.
Right.
And I don't know how they feel about Darnay Holmes. I think he's had ups and downs, but I think he's played almost exclusively in the slot.
Yes.
So I don't know if again, much might depend on how they feel about Flott and Robinson before they decide on Darnay Holmes.
All right, we didn't have a chance to get to this year's draft class, which is an excuse to get you on the
Right.
phone on Big Blue Kickoff Live later in the draft.
Right.
Sorry, you're stuck now. But we will wrap with this question before we say goodbye. Just throw out, in all your extensive film watching of this class, give me some of your pet cats, guys that you're like, these are Greg Cosell guys. I can't get enough of watching these guys on tape when I watch the draft class this year.
The popcorn guys, Greg.
You know what? I brought some of my notes. Let me look, and I probably brought the
bring out the
guys
notes.
that I like. I hope I did. I hope I did. Let's see.
And by the way, these are some of the notes that you will post on Twitter sometimes, which are great.
yes,
It's his full
they're
draft
phenomenal.
reports.
I love the tight end from Utah, Dalton Kincaid.
Oh, what a route runner he is,
I love that kid. Yeah, and he's a guy I really like on tape. I did him last summer, and I loved him. And then I did him. I've already done him this summer. I really liked him a lot. In fact, at this moment, I have to do a little more work, but right now I don't have a weakness for him. I mentioned Jonathan Mingo, a wide receiver from Ole Miss. Really, really like that kid
And
a
by
lot.
the way the Chiefs use Travis Kelce, you bring Dalton Kincaid
I think
in
he
with,
could be that guy.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean,
right?
again, like I said the question is whether Kincaid can develop into a foundational receiver in an NFL pass offense in a way that parallels Travis Kelce. And I said, I'm not suggesting that he's Kelce right now, because, as soon as you mention a name, people think, oh, you think he's Kelce. I'm not saying that he's Travis Kelce right now, but I mean, I think he's that kind of receiver. The guy who I really, really like, and everybody does, so it's not, is Bijan Robinson. He's really good. Let's see. Zay Flowers, I mentioned. I love him. There's a receiver out of Cincinnati I find really intriguing.
Scott,
Tyler
right?
Scott.
Yeah.
Tyler Scott. He's Jalen Hyatt and Tyler Scott are probably going to run under 4.3. They're those guys, and that's going to, that'll get people excited. But I think that Scott is a little more than that as a receiver. He's really intriguing. Like, to me, I don't think he'll get into the first round, but I think he's the kind of receiver, to me, that style that the Giants should be looking for.
Yeah, I have not watched it. I
Yeah.
look forward to doing
Yeah.
that. Greg, this is awesome. We got to
All right.
run.
All right.
And
Always
we-
good to
and we
talk
will,
to you.
And we will talk to you
Be
again
well,
before
Greg.
the draft.
All
Greg
right, guys.
Cosell, NFL Films. Thank you for joining us on the Giants Huddle Podcast, brought to you by PSEG. Energy efficiency for game time and anytime. Visit PSEG.com/Giants for discounts, rebates, and home energy assessments.